Welcome to the Nightmare Box presenting The Art of Wargaming. I am Yaga Malark.
And I am Onishiro.
Welcome to episode 2, Waging War. We are here in the bunker. You might hear my wife and the cat Cassius in the background. But yeah, we are here to talk about waging war and So we were going to kind of do this first part, talking about something that relates to the rest of the topic, and something from our own wargaming experiences. Oni has a lot of expertise in more fighting games and that sort of thing, and I'm more of a Warhammer 40k. So we're going to talk about some of the stuff we've had recently. Recently, I've had a buddy who has been using an Eldar flyer spam list against me. Now, anybody who follows 40k meta knows what I'm talking about, but for those of you who don't, an Eldar flyer spam is a whole lot of jet planes coming at you real fast. And in those jet planes are wizards who are who are dealing damage to you at the same time that these jet planes are also hitting you with their guns. And so it's a very fast, very aggressive technique that a lot of people find hard to deal with. And 3 times I managed to defeat this, rather unlikely. The first time I was using Death Guard, and I was using Chaos Knights, and I managed to have a helm on one of them, the Helm of Warp Sight, which takes away all modifiers. So the reason that this Eldar flyer list is really dangerous is that you're taking -2 to hitting any of them, because they're all Altioch, and they're all -1 because they are super fast. And then you can do an additional -1 for stratagem. So you're looking at -3 on a particular flyer. That's hard to hit. The Helm of Warp Sight on my Chaos Knight ignores all modifiers. So he just hits them like normal. And that's real dangerous when you're matching their toughness with your strength.
That's a hard counter at that point.
Hard counter. The second time around, I was using orcs. And orcs are always bad at shooting. And so, I mean, they always hit on 6s. And you can use a stratagem to make them hit on 5s and 6s. And so I'm just sitting there with my Stompa, which is a big, a super heavy orc vehicle.
Knight type.
A knight type.
Yeah.
And just unloading the way I normally would do. And I did fairly well there. And then this last time I was using AdMech. Didn't know how I was going to do necessarily. But by bubbling properly and being right up against the edge of the board when I started, I limited the effect that he could have, and I pushed my Castellan robots right into his center, threatened some stuff that he couldn't really do without, and so he had to turn his stuff around and go back there, which was right in my firing lanes, and so I got to just blow him off the board.
Which is apparently probably something that he doesn't have to deal with very often.
I imagine not. Like, a lot of people move off the backboards. You can surround fairly quickly or
Try to backpedal. Which is exactly what you don't want to do.
Right. Well, because that Eldar list is all about hitting hard, hitting fast, and taking out your priority pieces before you have a chance to use them. Your job is to make sure that they can't do that first turn, and then to make good decisions after that with who you're shooting at.
Yeah, no doubt. And especially with, like, having the spam, that, like, super high pressure, you have to have an effective way to combat that.
Right, because it's not just one aircraft or 2 aircraft. We're talking like 3 of these things coming at you, and yeah, it can be rough. But I feel like I did well. They were good games. He did well too. But just anybody who's out there listening who might be thinking, "What can I do about flyer spam?" This might be the episode for you. But Oni, you were just telling me about something in For Honor that you thought related here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Dealing with spammers. Yeah, some new updates came through. Centurion and Gladiator got a rework, and neither of them are, particularly hellish. But on, like, mid to low tiers, a lot of people have serious issues with them just for this similar reason. Just a lot of pressure, like a lot of, like, forward assault, and especially Orochi they keep making him faster and faster, and there's a lot of, like, spam that people have a hard time dealing with. It'll prevent people from getting into the game, even just having given a copy. It can be difficult, and it's the same exact situation I've I've been helping people and dealing with it myself, and like recently I've been doing a lot of Kensei and Hito Kiri, and they all use different defensive techniques to deal with the problem.
Sure.
And it's all about knowing that they're going to push in on you. You know, Hito's got a lot of unblockables and hyper armor.
Right.
But like the idea is not to try to throw charged heavies out, which is something that a lot of people want to do. Like throw the big guns immediately, trying to push through. They're spamming fast enough. They're going to hit you multiple times. They're going to hit you more than once. You know, it's going to be that 3-4 fighter jet style. You're going to be taking hits. So you have to quickly and readily respond and know that that's what they're going to do, you know. Throw out chaining heavies, you know, like people are upset at that, but you're meeting spam with, you know, a different speed and a different response to that, you know, knowing your character, knowing your enemy, another thing that ties in today, both speed and knowledge of your foe, you know.
Absolutely critical.
Definitely. And same with whether you're doing that with Hito and using hyper armor and cancels, or you're using Kensei and using dodge attacks and deflection or superior block to do the same thing, you know, to counter that predictive spam. You know, they're going to throw it out, you know, be ready for it.
Sure. And I mean, it sounds like the key to getting a big upset, which is the point of any underdog, when you're facing down a superiorly quick or a superiorly armed foe, it's kind of that element of surprise, kind of that element of being able to do something they weren't expecting or do something that they weren't necessarily, definitely weren't anticipating. So like in Belagarth, the biggest field upset that I've seen was probably that first year of Gladiators. That was back in 2005. And I mean, the Gladiators one-on-one, they were as you would expect most noobs to be. They were somewhat competent, but most of them could not hold their sword to a veteran. However, that whole year of Gladiators, we had spent the time working on the basics. We had spent the time working on specifically the basics of moving. I had just gotten done being a drum major. And the bonus of that is we did drills constantly in marching band. It was just something that we were really into. And so I transferred that to Gladiators, and not a whole lot of people liked it until that first day on the Stygian field. Because that first day on that Stygian field, they went out there and they obeyed the orders exactly as they were issued. And if you know anything about Stygians, you know that they are skirmishers at best, not really line fighters.
Yeah.
And so to have a force that was moving, unified, and knew how to fight unified was an incredibly... It challenged the meta, if you will, at the time.
100%.
And we took on the Urukai and won. They were the dominant force in the realm at the time. They had all the veterans. And we won consistently at that time because people did what they were told. They stood in line. But then, again, that was something that had never been seen in the mountain man culture of Stygia. And so it was that unexpected that brought about a really big upset in the power structure of the realm. But Oni, I imagine that you've seen a big upset on the field yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. One actually I had personally myself, and is a very, very similar to a situation that you're talking about. We were running Valhalla, groups of 2 or more, and well, I think there were some solos in there. That there always is. But and I was rolling with Kaji Ikuma, and we were a very prominent and practiced duo. And it was a very similar situation. You know, Stygia is known for their skirmishers. You know, they're strong solo fighters and flanking ability. Basically, you know, they're yeah, it's a lot to deal with on a single situation. And Urukai being the shield wall fighters. You know, the organized, well, semi-organized orcs that they are. They right. They try. And fantastic, great unit. But Kaji and I were rolling 2-man, and we were practiced. And we were both running DPS support weapons, 6 to 8 foot, 2-handers. Right. And we killed double digits, 20 plus, low 30s, just at one after the other because the opponent wasn't prepared.
Right.
They would roll up on us, and we were sprinting. We were full energy, full force all the time. They weren't. They were thinking, oh, they're tired. They've been fighting for 15 minutes. They're still. It's fine. We'll just roll up on them. But they weren't utilizing proper tactics. They weren't prepared for us to be ready to go, right. And it was the same type of thing. You're just taking prey on the enemy's misthought.
Yeah, and that's absolutely kind of the point that Sun Tzu is making, especially in the last chapter. But I think it's one of the big ones that he wants to make in this chapter. And the big point that we're going to be talking about today is economy of force. You're going to hear me use that term a lot. And what economy of force means is doing the minimal action to achieve the maximum result. It seems like it's simple in practice, but a good example of something like this would be min blocking with a shield, covering just enough of your shoulder that it will block what is needed, but not more, because
Truly.
You don't need to. And from there you can spring into other things. So we're going to get right into it. The first thing that Sun Tzu is talking about in this particular chapter is the importance of speed. He says, I have heard of reckless haste in war, but never have I heard of caution that was called for, which is to say that you can go too fast, but going too slow is way worse of a sin, because he includes in here, he's talking about that it will bankrupt the state. It is expensive to maintain an army in real life.
Truly.
And so the concept of beating your opponent before your state went bankrupt was a big deal, especially at this time when people were getting into wars for a lot of different reasons. Remember, he was writing during the Warring States period. And so this idea of economy of force, doing the minimum amount, wasn't just a matter of preserving life, which was important too, preserving the lives of your soldiers, but also preserving the state and the resources of the state.
Which was presumably what you were fighting to assist or support in the first place.
Or expand.
Yeah. Excuse my French.
But all those things were absolutely reasons for going to war. So you might ask yourself, okay, what does this have to do with Belagarth or with Warhammer 40K? We don't actually have to maintain supply lines or anything like that, so what's the point? Well, in the case of either, field position is huge. If you command the field, then you command where the fights are going to take place, with who the fights are going to take place. If you send out your strongest fighters to be in specific areas, they are going to command a certain presence in those areas, and it will change the face of the battlefield.
It's everything. Well, not everything, but a gigantic factor.
It's a gigantic, yeah. I mean, and the flanking should be thought about in this way for a number of reasons, but the big one is that the flanking isn't so much about getting in there and killing people. I mean, that's obviously the fun part of it. But the real thing about flanking is that it stops your opponent. It makes your opponent do something that they weren't expecting to do in the first place, makes them fight on your terms. And when you have the speed advantage, you can make those calls. And the same thing in 40K. If you're moving quickly across the field and you're putting pressure on my gun line, you're making me make decisions I don't want to make. I'd love, as an AdMech player, for you to stay over there.
It's easy to make. It's absolutely easy to make the easy calls. It's easy to play everything by the books when everything's going your way.
Right. But speed often confers an advantage, and it confers an advantage for two really particular reasons. Target selection and target priority. If you are moving quickly, then you get to make those calls. And again, the target selection, in the case of Belagarth, you're talking about archers. You're talking about polearms. You're talking about shieldmen that you know are going to be a huge issue, or any fighter that you know is going to rack up a kill count. Those should be the people that you are targeting. Those are your priorities.
High priority.
And as the speedier team, again, you can engage those people with the people you want to engage them with. I'm not going to send my weakest fighters up against your strongest fighters. It's just not smart, unless it's a bait, unless it's a feint in order to draw you into a position on purpose. Not necessarily nice to use your friends this way unless they know about it ahead of time. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
This idea of like Turkey Feathers. Turkey Feathers, my apprentice Turkey Feathers. He's a guy here in Stygia.
Great fighter. Great
Amazing
guy.
fighter. And anytime I'm across the field from him, I'm always thinking, how am I going to... He's a priority.
Yeah, he's high priority.
Gonna get kills.
And maybe for similar reasons. He's fast. He's got high speed.
Yes.
He can cause big problems immediately. You know, and that's exactly what you're saying. When you have high speed, you are choosing the battlefield. You are choosing who's fighting who because you are making the initial engagement. You're not being a responsive fighter.
Right.
You are choosing the initial assault.
And sometimes the most effective thing can be a static nothing happening. Let me kind of give that a context. Let's say I look across the field and I know there's a particular fighter who's going to give my team problems. I don't know if I can necessarily take that fighter. It might be 50-50 or they might have it on me. But I'm looking at them like they're an issue. Nobody else in my team can deal with them. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to just stay out of range.
Yep.
I'm going to just draw their attention, make sure they're focused on me, and try to stay alive so that my team can wrap up everybody else and come and deal with this problem as a group. Because second best to being able to take out your priority target is just to neutralize.
Them. Yep.
Just neutralize that target in their tracks and make it so they're not doing that damage. Because, I mean, if they're not able to do the damage, it doesn't matter if they're dead or if they're just hung up on something. But this goes for a 40K too. If you know that your opponent has tanks, big tanks, and you have nothing that can really take those tanks on, getting right up on those tanks and getting base to base with them so that they can't shoot the next turn, that's just as good as destroying them a lot of the times because they are still taken out of that fight.
Oh, truly. And from a fighter aspect as well, you know, this is gonna make you a better fighter. You know, you're never putting yourself in an easy shot situation. You're not going to be like, it's much more difficult to build bad habits fighting these fights.
Right.
You know, because if you're trying to learn, if you're trying to get better, these are the fights where you're going to do it, you know.
Exactly. And speed is also exceptionally important, not just in terms of battlefield and battlefield position, but also one-on-one.
Oh, 100%.
You're facing down that other person, the same things apply. If you keep up that pressure with combos and surgical strikes, by surgical strikes I mean the shots you're throwing are not just wild shots. They're shots that they're supposed to land. They're supposed to cause damage. And if your opponent blocks them, good for them. But I don't throw shots that I don't intend to do something with, unless it's a feint.
Yeah.
But even there, that's an intentional thing that I'm doing to open somebody up.
Yep. And you're doing it fast.
Right.
You got to have the fast breaks and you got to have the fast counter. You know, you got to be on the response. Otherwise, it's a useless device.
And if you're wasting movement, it's just as useless. You can't...
Worse.
Like, any sort of wasted movement, any sort of needless flourishing or posturing or anything like that, that's wasting time. That's wasting energy that you could be using to kill your opponent. So this comes back to that economy of force, the economy of effort. Never put forth more effort than you need to, because it can be long days. We fight out there in the hot sun, and we're doing it without a whole lot of water sometimes with hangovers. So take it easy. Do not overexert yourselves. And again, the speed thing is not just about moving quickly, but also always moving with purpose. So after strength or speed, Sun Tzu talks about the importance of gaining strength from the enemy. And this is the other part of this chapter, is the idea of gaining strength from your defeated enemy, not just using a victory to be another laurel, but using it to strengthen your forces, to strengthen the state. And for Sun Tzu, this is literal. He's talking about foraging instead of sending for supplies from the capital. You should always be grabbing your supplies from the enemy. And if you should capture 5,000 enemy chariots, you should absolutely appropriate 5,000 enemy chariots, because they are now your enemy chariots. Destroying that kind of stuff is ridiculous.
It's counterintuitive.
Well, it's all very expensive, and it would be a waste at that time. So repurposing that stuff was a good idea. Again, enemy swords, armor, shoes. These are all things that have been taken throughout history by people and just kind of repurposed for their own things. But you might think to yourself, what does this have to do with wargaming? for the most part, we don't play for keeps. Like, if I beat your army in Warhammer, I don't get to keep it. Unless we're playing some weird deathmatch version of Warhammer that I've never heard of.
Pink slipping armies.
Right. Or on the flip side of that, it's not like when we kill somebody in Belagarth, they stay dead. And we're not going to loot their gear, because that's their gear. But, in kind of the abstract, civility is absolutely a virtue. And learning from your opponent is something that you can do in these games where you can't do that necessarily in normal war, because in normal war your opponent is dead.
Truly.
Hopefully by the end of it. But that means there's not a whole lot of conversation that can be had there. Here we can. After we've done a match, after you and I have sparred, or after we've done a Warhammer game, we can sit there and chat afterwards. And if I was an absolute tool the entire time and made it a terrible game for you, or a terrible fight for you, you're not going to want to teach me a whole lot. If you saw a huge hole in my defense or a huge error in my technique, you'd be disinclined to tell me about it because
massively.
I'm a jerk. Yeah.
There's no reason.
But if I've been polite the entire time, if I've abided by the rules and not tried to skimp by on anything, and if we've had a nice, fair, clean, friendly match, well, then I can absolutely turn to you at the end of it and say, hey, how did I do? And you can say, oh, wow, I really like these portions, but this could use some work, or, your formation here was try this, We can have that back and forth. We can learn from one another. And so that's absolutely gaining something from your opponent, but you have to be nice to do it. You have to treat your opponent with respect, and you have to treat your opponent with dignity in order for them to want to engage with you in that way.
Truly. And even in old world situations where your opponent would die, if you blindly look at the fight and say they were defeated and don't, look at what strategy your enemy was using, the casualties that you took, you can go on to fight another fight and lose, countless men or resources because you didn't take into consideration what your enemy was doing and what they brought to the table.
Absolutely. So learning from your enemy is absolutely gaining strength from them. And in Warhammer 40k, you can do this literally. Because most of the world, including here in the United States, plays by ITC, which is International Tournament Circuit rules. If you're in Europe, you do Europe rules, but basically everybody else who plays on a national or a big level uses ITC format. And with the ITC, there's a primary mission that everybody's trying to get. Let's say there's 6 objectives on the table, and you need to control or contest 5 of them in order to get a bonus point. But in addition to that, there's a bunch of secondaries that you can take, things that you can tailor to your army. And I would advise anybody who's having trouble thinking, like, what sort of secondaries should I be taking here? Do something you're going to be doing anyways.
Be advantageous to your army.
Be advantageous to your army. For instance, I'm a gun line. My main mission with my big guns is to take out your big guns before they hurt me. I should be taking big game hunter just about every time that it's allowed to me, because those are the things I'm hunting anyways. Or if I'm playing my orc army and I'm screaming across the table at you, well, I'm trying to get behind enemy lines anyways, aren't I?
Truly.
Why not get points for it too? And so there's a philosophy behind that too. Do as little effort as possible. If your secondaries in Warhammer are something completely deviant from what your army is capable of, you're not going to score points. So do what you're doing anyways. Try to score points doing what you would be doing anyways, and in this way you can also gain strength from the enemy without knocking him out afterwards and taking his models, which is inadvised.
Unless you're playing black market Warhammer,
right? Right.
Underground Warhammer.
No holds barred. 2 men enter, 1 man leaves.
I brought the Tyranid, man. You're going down tonight.
And the last thing, literally gaining strength from the enemy, goes back to that civility idea, and it's the idea that in Belagarth and in the fighting game community and in Warhammer 40k, you have teams. You have groups of people who are... Sorry about that. My cat, true to form, decided to try to sabotage the show again by getting into Oni's bag, and we had to deal with that briefly. So I was on the point of recruitment, that in all these organizations, you have groups of people, teams, that are vying for international competitions and international notoriety. The best way to attract people to your team, the best way to sell your brand, is to be a good opponent, is to be somebody who they walk away from the field or they walk away from the table and they're like, man, I may have gotten my butt handed to me right there, but he did it with a smile. And I'm real happy to have met that person, you know, like that's what we should be striving
Truly.
for, I think, you know, because again, I know there were several teams that I was turned off of in Bellegarth that I was offered membership in that I didn't want to be a part of because they had this reputation for being mean to people or for being exclusive or something like that. And I didn't want that reputation. Again, you might know those people and they're not that way, but if you come across that way, you know.
It's all about how you come across.
It's all across, yeah, exactly. So if you're looking to recruit people, honeys, vinegar, some sort of proverb about both of those.
Truly, yeah. If you know, and that's a big deal if you are trying to go with these methodologies, because if you are running vinegar style, you know, these people are less inclined to actually work with you.
Right.
Or might, you know, work with you at first, but bear heavily in mind how they were treated or how they perceived how you treated them.
Right.
Regardless of your intent, you know, where if you are, you know, good game, and, you know, talking to people and being a good sport, you know, generally, like, people are much more open to at least interact with you and be open-minded as to fighting with you.
Or, I mean, just being nice to you back as well.
Truly.
Doing everything we were talking about there, learning from each other. Yeah, no, civility is always best. We don't want to call it chivalry or anything like that because it has nothing to do with gender, but it has everything to do with dignity and respect between people. But to use something that doesn't involve any of those things, let's go to our battle of the day.
I think, you know, I don't know. I think, no civility, truly.
No. Yeah, so some might look at this, the Mongols, and wonder how did a group of steppe-faring hunters, nomads, manage to build one of the largest empires that has ever existed on this earth, and do it in a very short amount of time with a whole lot of success. Well, they used the things we were talking about so far in this episode. They used this whole economy of force, the economy of effort, speed, and gaining strength from the enemy to always be one step ahead. Because they had to be. They couldn't afford not to be. So
there's no missteps in that situation.
No, you can't make mistakes. But the steppe trains you not to make mistakes. And so Genghis and his brood did quite well at doing so. So today we're talking about the Battle of Nankuo Pass. And this happened in 1213 and was technically between Genghis and the forces of then Jin China. But this was Tolui specifically, his general who he had sent to say, this is the shortest route between our main forces and China. I need you to secure it. And the way that, as the name suggests, Nankuo Pass, it was between the plateau of the Dragon and the Tiger, and was about 20 miles away from the capital. We're talking real close. But the pass itself was about 14 miles long. And on either side, you had fortified positions. We're talking full-on walls with spikes and dudes manning those walls who were trained in archery and pouring oil down on people. Like, it was just not a good place to go.
Huge counter siege units, huge, dangerous archers.
Right.
Ridiculous numbers.
Mm-hmm. Which is what China had on its side. So Tolui, approaching this, of course, knows he can't directly assault the walls. He hasn't brought any siege weaponry of any sort, and cavalry make for a poor siege unit. So what he ends up doing is he ends up sending his general, Jebe. I don't know if I'm actually pronouncing that correctly. I've only ever read his name. But he sends this general Jebe to go about halfway down the pass, looking as though he is a reconnaissance party. So he gets about halfway down the pass, turns around, and goes into a full retreat. Well, the Chinese soldiers manning these forts are like, we got them. And so they do this full-on attack. They come pouring down out of the different portcullises and down out the sides of the pass, going down after this retreating horseman reconnaissance party that then turns around with the rest of the army who have just come up behind. And the Chinese defenders now find themselves in a very hopeless position against a strong enemy in a strong counterattack position. They destroy the army going against them, and then move up and seize the forts on either side, securing this pass for future movement.
That are basically unmanned at that point because of the overextension.
Exactly. So in this way, Tolui used both of these things we're talking about. He used speed, because once that battle was on, it was over very quickly. We're talking infantry versus cav. That doesn't work out well for the infantry in most cases. And then he used seizing the strength of the enemy, because he took these forts, and then later in the campaign, when they tried to lay siege to the Chinese capital, and were repelled the first time because winter was coming on, they had these strong positions, such as Nankoa Pass, to fall back to, so that the next year, when everything thawed, they could immediately move out and resume the campaign, at which point they took over China. Most of China.
A relative term for such a large landmass.
The South held out for quite a while. They had the walled cities. But yeah, so like I said, Tolui did both of these things, was very good at them. He showed incredible economy of effort. And that's really one of the most crucial things in waging war, like we were saying, is just making sure that everything you do is aimed at destroying the enemy. If you're doing a one-on-one fight, you shouldn't be throwing shots that you don't know where they're going to land. Every shot you throw should be aiming to take a limb or kill them or whatever the case may be. And if you're doing stuff in Warhammer 40k, you should not be taking shots at things that you have no hope of killing. If you've got a group of guardsmen and you're shooting them at a knight, strength 8, or T8, with strength 3 weapons, it's not going to go
You're
well.
wasting your time.
Especially, I mean, if that's the only option you got, it's the only option you got. But if you've got tanks and things that can aim at that knight, those guardsman shots are far better placed at something else. And,
Truly.
And so using every shot to count is kind of what I got out of this. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And that ties into the same thing you were talking about before. You know, changing your secondary to what you're going to be doing anyways. You know, use your strengths as an application. You know, if that's what you got, if you guys are the best cav and you are fighting against a group of archers, you know, use their hubris against them. You know there are huge numbers. You know they think they're just going to stomp you. Make them try to use that against you. You know, pull a retreat in front of them, an aimed retreat. Make them overextend, you know, and then do what you do. And then use that against them and do what you do. Run them down. You know, they're not going to be able to make it back up the hill. They're no longer in an advantageous position with a bunch of counter siege set up. You know, now you've changed because you knew what they were going to do. You know, you agged on what you wanted them to do.
Controlling the battle, making them go where you want them to go, having the priority objectives where you want them. These are the key factors of the economy of force.
So, application.
Yeah. Well, I think the application of some of these concepts would be better served by some stories from us. So, neutralization. The idea of neutralizing your opponent on the field with your actions. I rather enjoy this one.
No, it's absolutely classic.
But it involves being able to command either one opponent or several opponents and not have them engage with anybody else. And you're not necessarily doing much at all except squaring off against them.
Right.
But you're still commanding their presence, their thoughts, their actions on the field. They are looking at you, paying attention to you, and not doing it to anybody else on your team, which is the whole point of the neutralization game.
Absolutely. Just putting a wrench in the cog. Absolutely just stopping whatever kind of plan, whatever kind of situation they were going to bring. Bringing their speed to a stop. Changing their plan, forcing them to look at the situation as a whole.
And forcing them to have to change that.
Yes.
To have to deal with you instead. And that's one of the huge points about neutralization. And this is true in Warhammer 40k as well. Like I said, if you rush your opponent's tanks and engage them in combat, it doesn't matter if you can actually kill them at that point. They can't shoot you. If you're rushing up on your opponent's tanks in Belagarth, which is to say the heavy shieldmen or the spearmen, and you're staying right outside of their threat zone, but making it so that they can't make a whole lot of moves on you, you're absolutely neutralizing that opponent as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And down to like a classic RTS or MOBA style, you have a 5-on-5 situation. You have a bad counter jungler. He's ganking lanes. He's above level. He's got a lot of gold. He's been farming. He's tearing up your jungle. You didn't have a jungler at all. You had nothing there at that point. Neutralizing, dropping from a lane, making a change, being like, "Hey, I need to stop this snowball. I need to let this change course." It's all about even just being there, even just being in the jungle to stop it. Being on that end of the line when the counterflank happens. Addressing it, and even if it's a bad situation, sometimes calling attention to it is what will stop a plan.
Sure. Once people know what's going, that what's going on, it can stop their plan. I know teams like the Brotherhood of the Falcon that they don't particularly care if you know their plan or not. They're gonna follow through on that one.
Absolutely,
because that's their style for a lot of it. But no, it undermines the confidence of the enemy player if they think that their tricks have been exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that, that's about knowing your enemy, like we were talking about, knowing that they have the confidence to follow through with their plan no matter what. You can pull them into bad situations.
Sure.
You can pull them into advantageous situations for you when their aggression does not do them any favors.
I ran into a situation like this at one of the Auk Fests that I attended. That's Oktoberfest. It's an amazing event out in Illinois that I love to make.
I've heard nothing but good things.
Oh yeah, it's just an amazing site, amazing people, amazing battlefield. Just if I said amazing one more time, I'd hit myself with a whip. But one of the things they did at this particular Auk Fest was on the far end of the field, there was like a fort constructed out of hay bales, and there was a way in on 3 sides, and it was right up against the edge of the world. So there was a way in kind of on the, let's say, the south side, a way in on the west side, and a way in on the north side.
And the south wall was protected.
So one team starts kind of south side, and one team starts kind of north side.
So you can still fully surround the fort.
Well, you hit it at about the same time because like the fort wasn't one of the main features of the battlefield, but it kept leading to the victory going one way or the other.
It was a central point.
It was, because whoever took the fort had the chance to slide along the opponent's backline when they inevitably overextended themselves, forgetting the fort was there.
Controlling the battlefield.
Controlling the battlefield
is key.
So I was noticing that my team was consistently losing because of this fort, and I had noticed that a lot of the enemy's players on that side were vets. They had stacked that side pretty hard with their really good players.
Right.
And so I looked at the side, and I wasn't about to rearrange my team. I'm a nobody in the East. A few people know me in the West. I can sit down at a camp in the West for the most part and be welcomed.
Yeah, you're known, a longtime fighter, and you're respectable, and you treat others with respect.
I appreciate you saying so, sir.
It's on topic too.
But in the East, I don't have any sort of notoriety whatsoever. So I wasn't about to rearrange my entire 100+ person team based on something I observed, and to their eyes, I'm basically a noob. So I knew that wouldn't necessarily go my way. So I went to that side, and they were mostly noobs, kind of on that side. And I addressed them, and I said, "Hey, I know you guys don't know me from Adam, but I see a way for us to win here. Are you willing to try it?" And they said, "Sure, let's do it." So I said, "Okay, we're going to rush into the fort really fast. We're going to get them to kind of break their formation because they're thirsty, because they see us breaking formation. But nobody is going to engage. The second they start to engage, we start to fall back. I'm going to be behind you, hollering the entire time about what you should be doing. So don't worry. You're not going to get left behind. But, so we're going to run inside the fort, and then we're going to fall back to our entrance, and then I want you to concave, which is to say I want you to make a semicircle on that outside. And they followed my instructions. We ran inside that fort, made a bunch of noise, and I was like, fall back, fall back, fall back. We looked like we were going back in disarray. The enemy was hungry for us. These vets were like, gonna claim some noob scalps. Like, they were all up on it. And they came right into our trap. And like 3 or 4 rounds in a row, we stomped that side because they wasted their strength coming against our concave, which is that is the essential of an economy of force. When you're using a concave, because it means any shot you're throwing is lethal and it's supported.
Right.
It's an amazing situation that if you can find yourself on the winning end of the concave, it's an amazing place to be. But if you're on the opposite end, it's not as great. So we were able to break their strength, and then when the rest of our team was pushing forward, we were then able to push forward through this fort and take the field.
And yeah, absolutely. And, you had other factors going in that situation that I personally believe in. I love the green skin, like, fresh blood status. When you're working with, like, the purity, the untainted minds of new fighters, they're willing to try things, they're willing to do things, they're willing to like put faith in someone instead of having the tainted jaded views and be like, oh, I don't like this person, I don't know who this is, I'm not willing to try that. And then you have the advantageous mindset against the vets you're fighting. Right. They are like, what is happening? At first it's like met with like almost anger even, you're like, what? Well, I don't know what happened. All right, I don't know what happened, but we're just going to go back in there and we're going to stomp them. Right. No big deal. And you do the same thing. Happens again. And they're boosted because they're like, oh, we just got it. Mm-hmm. These guys are not invincible. This is not an unbeatable situation. We can do this. And so they're on high. And so your opponent's not ready. They're just not. They're not thinking about it. They're not treating it with respect because they don't know who these guys are, and they're whatever. Look at these, and that's where you want them to be. It's
using your opponent's hubris against them.
Absolutely,
making them overextend themselves like a wave and crash upon their own momentum is the whole idea of it. And you hit the nail on the head, I think, when you were talking about the spirit of new fighters. And I know that vets rip on noobs a lot, but one of the things that I love about new fighters is that they're usually hungry for a plan. They're usually hungry for somebody to say, hey, we're going to roll in an oblique formation, and then you're going to roll around the sides. Like because they haven't been around and they don't have an assumed plan in their head, vets, I think, are more resistant to big plans because a lot of them have already gotten an assumed role.
They have their style.
You know what? 6 years in, I decided that I was a tank, which means I'm walking at the enemy. And if I've got people on either side of me, that's swell. But my job as a tank is to walk at the enemy. I don't want to hear your plan, because I, sir, am walking at the enemy. But it's not, they found something they're comfortable with. And so, especially if a noob is trying to tell a vet what to do, a lot of times we'll be recalcitrant. And it's, again, you say we're jaded, we're cynical, but we've seen a lot of things fail. But the nice thing about new fighters is that you can say, hey guys, I got a plan, let's try it. And as long as you're not sitting there trying to I didn't pull rank. I didn't sit there and be like, you should listen to me because I said, I got an idea.
You just reached out. Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I think veteran fighters, from fighting game community to real life fighters in these multi-man situations can learn from is flexibility. Sure. Yeah, you are a tank fighter. Maybe be open to a different use of a tank. Be open to, you got someone, that throws out these kind of crazy whack ideas and they're like, yo, I know you're used to walking forward over here every time, but why don't you try walking forward from this angle over here while I'm doing this? And instead of just being like, well, dude, I don't know what the honky donk you're talking about, maybe there's something to it, you know.
And no, you're absolutely right. That flexibility is huge, and I think again the trap a lot of vets fall into is a lot of us have been in a unit for a while, and so we've adopted our unit's style, so to speak. You know, like when you speak of God Squad, you know that there's a particular style they bring to the field.
Absolutely.
When you speak of the Urukai, you know there's a particular presence that they're always going to have. When you speak of an Urukai fighter, they most units are kind of typecast in a way. Like they're looking for a particular type of person, a particular type of fighter in order to fill out their ranks to make it look like a cohesive whole.
Especially when you have these national teams that don't always get to practice together. They want a cohesive style and a cohesive, you know, plan.
So it kind of makes sense that vets might be resistant to doing something that might be outside of that norm or the cat. So it makes sense to me. But you know, this is an idea to. If somebody's got an idea, why not listen? You never know. It could just be that, you know, it's not a great idea, and the next time you don't do it. Because the beautiful thing about something like Belagarth, or the beautiful thing about something like Warhammer 40k, is that if you mess up, you're not actually dead.
Truly.
You are momentarily out of the fight, you get a breather, and then you can get right back into it. So new ideas help you kind of discover these scenarios and discover these situations, and the more that you're in them, the more that you experience tactical situations and new ideas within them, the more your mind's going to expand. The more options you're going to have in your toolbox, and also the more things you're going to know are not going to work. You know, for as long as I've been doing this, which has been a decently long time at this point, a full frontal charge 9 times out of 10 does not work.
Garbage.
Just doesn't work unless you are an extremely well-armed, well-armored force just rolling over an opponent.
A low tier, like low risk situation.
The full-on charge is disorderly. The full-on charge is disruptive to command and control, and it can isolate your best fighters and take them out of the fight, neutralize them before they're able to be used in a way that's advantageous to your team.
Because the others in that wave that are not at that pace, that are not able to follow the cavalry, the footmen, they're not going to be able to properly support the tip of that wave, the first frontal crash.
Right. No, you make an excellent point.
So once you get a handle on what role neutrally you take up, what presence you bring in a neutral position, just as the unit, as the army, as the force, then you have to look at use of energy into the style. What is cohesive? What is conducive as energy use for your style? How does that like apply to your different types of armies and factions in Warhammer?
Well, yeah, you guys have a very interesting point. And in Warhammer, we have 3 different like main theories for the building of an army. We have a gun line, which is what I typically like to play, and the way that works is you have your core figures, which are your big guns. I like to use Onager Doom Crawlers and Castellan robots because I'm AdMech.
Right.
But they're your big guns. They do a lot of damage. They typically move fairly slowly, and you've got them surrounded by your chaff, your fodder, your fluff. And these are I use Skitarii. But the idea is that you want to extend that bubble out as far as you can. You want to have as many of these Skitarii or these bubble units out there because they die instead of your guns is the idea.
Interference.
They get in the way so that your big guns can do their talking, and they don't get interrupted by things like charges or something that doesn't go according to that plan.
Right. They're conducive for energy use for that style. It allows you to put as much heat as you can into your big arm.
So the neutralization factor occurs when your bubble encounters your enemy force. Hopefully that bubble out there is distracting enough and is doing enough that your enemy wants to shoot at it and engage with it instead of your big guns. Meanwhile, your energy is directed to the big guns, which should be targeting very specific targets. Your target priority should be on. So with my Onager Dune Crawlers, I am always targeting the biggest, shootiest thing on their side because I want to neutralize that. I want to make sure that they cannot reach out and touch me with their big guns, because once that's off the board, I can pick my targets as I will. It's just a matter of convenience at that point.
And it's both. It's all three of the factors in waging war. Mainly in this one, the 2 plus neutralization, which we've touched upon very heavily.
Right.
It's use of neutralization. You know what your interference is going to do, and so you're using that as a mastery. Your every move, you know exactly what you need to do, based on the enemy. You know which way you want to head. And that way you capitalize on speed. You don't have to mess around letting those units go to waste like a lot of people like to do. They're like, these are my interference guys, whatever. This is my shockwave troops. And they just let them die. You need to capitalize on them as much as you can. Use them to their maximum. That way when you're hitting with that, the big arm, the big cannon, you're maximizing. You're getting everything out of it.
Right.
It might only get you a couple extra shots, but those couple extra shots might be game winning.
Those can win the match. Absolutely. And the bane of any gunline army is a horde army, which is the next type I want to talk about.
A personal favorite.
I enjoy them too. I recently picked up an orc army because I was reading some of the Warhammer lore. It was a Black Templars omnibus.
Ooh.
And so the orcs were like the enemies of the Black Templars, and the more I read, the more I was like, I have to start an orc army. I need to play these dudes. And I don't win very often with my orcs, but I very much enjoy playing with them. And I mean, my win-loss ratio isn't bad. I don't win as much as with my AdMech, but
it's fun.
It's a lot. It's very fun. And so the mindset is a little bit different when you're dealing with a horde army. And the whole point of a horde army is that you have as many bodies on the field as possible. You want to have a decent number of bodies with a gun line, but with a horde army, we're talking like 200 plus models on the field. But it's not a crazy advance. Like we were saying about Belagarth, a full-on charge rarely works.
Oh, you'll get mowed down
because they're sloppy.
Yeah.
But if you can manage to organize your orcs, I understand that's a contradiction of terms. But if you can manage to organize your orcs and make sure that they are advancing in an organized fashion and that they are engaging the enemy at strategic points, a horde army can be very effective, especially with the fact of neutralization. If you can get your normal horde troops just to touch your enemy's guns, you've neutralized them. You don't have to kill them.
Absolutely.
You don't have to take them off the field. You just have to stop them from firing by engaging them in close combat. And this also works because there's a concept that if you defend everywhere, you are weak everywhere. And an orc army or a Tyranid army kind of makes you do that because they are attacking at all sides at once. And so unless you get really specific about where you want to defend, your whole force is effectively neutralized just by numbers alone.
Yep.
And in this way, the energy of the orc force is in its numbers. It's not wasting anything because that whole wave is in and of itself a strategy. This thing happens in Bell, it happens in normal fighting as well. If you look at the Germans, when they were trying to invade Russia, Operation Barbarossa, and they went to Moscow.
Stuffs the pants with newspapers.
But they had superior weaponry, they had the superior training, they had the superior equipment, and an army of Russian peasants who had no regard for their lives because the commissar behind them was scarier than the Germans.
Oh, far.
Numbers one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Numbers one. The Boer War down in South Africa. Numbers one out. The Zulus were not as well equipped as the German and English troops. Overrun. Sheer numbers.
And it's at that point, it's exactly that. It's you hit it on the head, almost terminology wise. While I was thinking it, listening, it's what is your neutral strength? What is your, at that point, it's numbers. So what is going to be the best situation for you in your neutral? Just straight up surrounding your enemies, being everywhere. And so then you look at how do you use of energy to maximize that? Cover, proper retreating, proper advancement. That way you can show up on them uninvited, just right at their doorstep. So you can maximize less distance time with cover. Don't make the front charge. You're going to be right in line for any kind of range, any kind of long range DPS. You're not pushing your neutral at that point.
Right.
You're wasting energy making things harder on yourself.
And the other issue you have is that if you're using a horde technique in Belagarth or in Warhammer 40k, you need to capitalize on your numbers. If you're trying to engage people in any sort of equal situation, you are doing it wrong. Your whole idea is to try to catch your enemy out of position so that you can wolfpack them with your superior numbers and whittle them down without having to face their full strength, because man to man, a horde army is not as strong normally.
No.
But what they have is those numbers, and so every single fight should be capitalizing on said numbers. The final type of Warhammer army, and honestly Belagarth army, if you want to expand the term far enough, is an elite army. And an elite army is exactly what it sounds like. We are talking the best of the best of the best, sir. They have the best equipment, they have the best armor, they have the best weapons, the best training. They are just nifty.
When I said personal favorite to Horde, I was wrong. This is actually absolutely my personal favorite.
I was going to say, usually when you play me, you want to play my Dark Angels.
Yeah, Elite Force. Yep. I like fighting outnumbered. I think Horde's my favorite to battle against.
Sure.
I love the outnumbered. I love the Elite Forces.
Well, it makes for a good story, going against it. Like, that's part of the reason I like playing orcs, is because I'm like, this is, whether I win or lose, this is an epic battle,
Absolutely.
So I feel you. But I struggle with elite forces because there is no room for error with an elite force. With a horde force, if you lose 10 dudes in a reckless endeavor, you have a little bit of leeway. With a gun line, if something goes slightly wrong, if you've allowed for contingencies, you should be okay. But in the case of an elite, every single loss is huge. Every single model or every single player that goes down is a massive loss to your army, and so you have to be very concerned about your angles of fire. You have to be very concerned about your loss to taking of enemies ratio, and attempt to keep all of that up. So you have to abide by these rules even more strictly in this case than others.
Oh yeah, exactly that. That is 100% what I was going to say. You need to be on point. You need to have everything from your neutralization down to your knowledge of your enemies down, because you can't make any mistakes, and you need to capitalize on all of theirs.
Well, and a good example of an elite force is a Marine army. And in Belagarth, a good example of an elite force would be the Elite Blood Falcons. They have it in their name. And,
Absolutely.
And they're a group of guys that prides themselves on being, or guys and gals, who pride themselves on being on all the time. Like, every time they take to the field, they are there to do business.
And they do.
And so they live up to their name and to this particular play style of wargaming. And so, speaking of Belagarth, let's just go straight into talking about some Belagarth fight styles and how this kind of relates in.
Oh yeah, it's huge. Every weapon and fighting style that match them or don't match them is a big deal. And fighting style to style in your local realm is one thing, with people that you practice with consistently and you learn about them, as to going onto a national field where all of a sudden, you're used to two-handed 8-footers just robot shotting a line over and over and over again. And then all of a sudden there's this mad, counter flanker style that's sprinting and spear stabbing and taking down flankers and taking down stragglers and strong fighters. It's that's the kind of things that throw people off. Those are the type of, weapon style, weapon roles, as you're talking about, style roles that change the battlefield.
Oh yeah, and it's different everywhere. So when Oni and I are speaking, we are of course analyzing using the mountain man perspective that is Stygia. We're an isolated realm in Montana. We don't get the exposure a lot of the realms do. We're getting a lot better about it these days by traveling around.
Oh yeah,
but we still have this isolated style. But we notice that there's a certain way that Midwesterners do things. There's a certain way that the Easterners do things. The Californians have their own particular way of going about fighting.
Absolutely.
And so we're of course are going to be coming at it from our angle. We'll try to look at it from y'all's angles at some other point. Maybe have y'all on to talk about it from a Californian or an Illinois point of view. But for now, you're going to be getting the crazy mountain man perspective. And so, I noticed that you like to fight what I think you would call support, right? You're a support fighter.
Yeah, I'm DPS support.
So what does a support fighter look like within Bell?
There's quite a few support roles. You got melee support roles. You have spearmen, and those can range from shield and spear, which are less aggressive and foot powered as a standard sword and board fighter. They're more reliant on a line. They're more reliant on interruption. They're very much support based as a style. Sure. I feel personally, maybe people would argue that, but one-handed spear is just not, the strongest weapon style for 1v1 fighting.
Sure.
But otherwise, pole arms, huge. Dagger fighters often are support. Even one-handed fighters are support.
Archery could be,
and that's Then you start getting into range, and then you got archery. Those guys are absolutely huge. Just pulling the minds off of the enemy fighters and being like, "Am I going to get shot with an arrow?" is a game-changing amount of thought to apply to some people's minds.
Oh, sure.
It's huge. And then you even got middle grounds like rock throwers. Not calling you out or anything, but it's crazy. It's absolutely one of the most frustrating things to have someone roll up on you and rock you in the face. And it's demoralizing for a lot of people. And you talk about, having a strong neutral position, having style, support in that sense. One of the biggest things they can do is either mess with the minds of their opponents or take advantage of that.
Sure. And so everything a support fighter is doing is backing up or supporting, obviously, the advance of the DPS or tank fighters.
Enabling. That's what we got to do. We got to either... Yeah, and I guess that's a better way to put it. When we are messing with our opponent's minds or taking advantage of it, we are either enabling our tanks, our DPS, to do their job, to do their proper use of energy, their neutral stance, or we're taking advantage of theirs.
I dig it. No, that's perfect. And without support fighters, the field would look very different. I mean, I'm a support fighter myself these days because of these body issues I got going on. Hopefully, getting back to being a tank or a DPS at some point. But I don't mind archery. But let's talk about some DPS. So like DPS would be like Florentiners. Really aggressive spear or reds. Even I've seen some single sword folks that would absolutely fall out into this DPS category.
Crazy.
Shout out to Dakinai.
Name drop in the crazy one-handers. There's nothing like them though, and that's the thing. Just as I was talking about a big ore-shotting red fighter on a line, you have crazy single-handers. You have no idea what they're going to do, and the DPS they can pump out can be phenomenal.
Absolutely. And obviously, as the name implies, without your DPS, your damage-inflicting fighters, you're not going to win.
No.
I mean, they obviously need the support of the support guys, and they usually need a tank to kind of go in and mess things up for them. But a damage person should be concerned with one thing and one thing only, and that is dealing damage to the opponent.
Yeah, absolutely. And minimizing damage upon themselves, because that is definitely going to impede their ability to do their job, to maximize their energy output and maximize what they're supposed to be doing.
Absolutely. I mean, that being said, I've seen some legged Florentiners just
Hey, yeah, back
pull a hat trick at the end of the game.
Back a tiger in a corner, and you got some problems on your hand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk now about tank fighting, but I think I'm going to let Oni do a lot of talking about it because I know of one style of tank fighting, and I'm halfway decent at it, but Oni knows several.
Modest.
But why don't you tell us about that, Oni? These like the different styles. So a tank is somebody who's designed to sit there and kind of take damage. In theory, that's the base theory, but there's a lot of nuance to it.
I love tanks. Yeah, I'm a huge. Secretly, I'm a big fanboy for tanks, just because I work with them so much. And I mean, I guess I got in that regard. I have two favorite units. One are archers because they're my favorite units to fight. And two, tanks, because they're my favorite unit to fight with. And yeah, I love tanks. I find them on the national field. I find them on our fields. I work with tanks constantly, and I have to know them to be able to fight them, and I have to know them to be able to properly fight with them. And tanks come in a million different flavors. Like, they are so different. There's only so many shots you can make. There's only so many shield checks, bashes, and blocks you can do. So it's all about how you use them and your kit.
And it's really limited, isn't it? I mean, it's one of those things where, because those shots are so limited, because usually the tank is right there on the front line, facing down the other tanks and the other polearms and the archers, every shot they make has to count. They're kind of the elite fighters of the field in that way, because if they make any mistake there on the line, it's over. Like, a tank has to be on point all the time. They can't, like, if they're throwing a feint that they dedicate too much to and they lose their arm, they lose half their reason for being there.
100%. It's absolutely exactly what you're saying. They may be, a lot of people have the perception that they have a lower, floor to get on because you're playing defensive and stuff. And that may be true. You might have a low skill floor to get into shield work, but the ceiling is huge.
Sure.
And the elite fighters, a ton of the best fighters that control the field and do a lot of work, are in this category, are in the tank shield fighter category.
Absolutely. I mean, as I'm sitting here, I've got so many pop into mind that I can't really think of a good example because they're all good examples.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the most part, they're all great. Like I love the attitude of tanks. Because they're there to help their team. They're the most support. Yes, that's their job, arguably. But arguably, the biggest fallback is when support doesn't help their team, when they're not doing that. And so tanks, bar hyper aggressive tanks, are always there to help the team, and that's it. Is then how are they doing that? What kind of tank do you have?
Right.
There are, like I was just talking about, there are hyper aggressive tanks that try to do the wall crash, and they're great, but you know what? They die. They die so often,
and if they don't have follow up, they're not really useful.
Yeah, and a lot of time those follow-up are whoever can keep up with them on the sprint to the line. And I can't tell you how many people know what that will really bring, what that'll do. Because those people are crashing into it, and yeah, they might get a limb, but they're done. And if there isn't a red fighter or a spearman or archers immediately capitalizing on that split-second instance, you're dead in the water and you've gained nothing.
That's a waste of energy.
Purely. It's to the zero. Down to the zero. And it's a bummer at that point because that's such a powerful role and that's such an important role to do exactly opposite of what you should do. And I guess that's a good example. You're saying exactly a huge waste of energy. You're putting all your force into something that you're not supposed to be doing. You're not a DPS. You're not a support. You're not supposed to be like head bashing a wall with aggression. You are the wall. You're supposed to be making this, holding the line, making a setup, working with your team. That's the whole point. And so, yeah, you got that. Yeah, I love, on that note, the nice middle ground. I love like the hybrid tank. I love the DPS tanks. I love the counterflanker tanks. This is also another, you have to be high skill. You cannot be on the floor. You can't be just throwing stuff out. You are going to be fighting the elite fighters on the other team every time. You're going to be fighting multiple opponents, and you have to be able to work with other counterflankers because that's who they're trying to kill. Right. They're trying to kill captains, leaders, call out shot makers, and they're trying to fold the line. You have to stop the push. You have to stop the real waves, the ones that are going to break the walls down. And that's a hard role to fill. And on that note, then you have the farthest end of that, which is the static tank. And they are the hardest role end-to-end, polarizing-wise, to fill for tanks. They capitalize on the neutralization, the holding a role, literally. You, in a situation like Bell, you are known. Your enemy knows exactly what you're doing, and they're already trying to figure out how to stop you. Your mind games are, this is high tier stuff. This is not like big guy whatever, and that's why it's so polarizing. If you have a low tier version of this, they get walked on. If you cannot back up the wall that you're throwing up, it's worthless. And that's about using your style, and that's where that comes in. That's the problem. If you have a wall that goes berserk when they get charged, they're just as worthless as the shieldman that's just checking the line.
Yeah,
you're not backing anybody up. You're just opening yourself up. It's not conducive. You need the high skill. You need the parries. You need the pocket shots. You need to play hyper defensive. Make them overextend. They're coming at you. You're standing there motionless, waiting. Like, I love counterfighter tanks. Even the slow roll is it's the best thing ever, because people fold. The lines start to move. Even if it's solid and you have a spread out like static tank line, it's never pushing forward. Like, these people have to be enticed by support fighters, by aggressive DPS to move forward, because they won't do it. And then it's just top tier as far as like mental control is the static control that those tanks have.
Well, it sounds like they need a lot of defense or a discipline to do what they're doing.
Definitely. A lot of practice, and they have to know their opponents.
Yep. Yeah. It sounds like it would pay off. So we've been talking about the weapon styles a little bit, how they relate to this DPS tank support nomenclature. But let's talk a little bit about those weapon styles too, because I think there's a lot of important points to be made about like sword and board specifically, not necessarily dealing with it in the idea of a tank or a DPS.
Right.
Archery, for instance, is one of the ones where it's kind of easiest to see this. As an archer, you have a limited number of shots. True, on most fields you can collect your arrows or collect the opponent's arrows as you go, but every time you bend down to collect an arrow, you're leaving yourself vulnerable. Every time that you remove yourself from position to go get an arrow, you leave yourself vulnerable. So life as an archer is all about economy of force.
Yeah.
Every shot you make has to have a reason. Now, I'm not saying that every shot has to hit its mark. I'm probably about 50-50 with my battlefield archery. I hit my target about 50% of the time, but I always make sure that I'm shooting at a target that even if they're distracted for a second by my shield, my arrow thumping against their shield or hitting their foot or whatever, that's enough.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases. So even if you're not the best archer in the world and you don't have the best archery, you can still use incredible economy of force, and this neutral posture is the other huge part of it. Like, if you're an archer and you're sitting there constantly at the ready and you've got your finger on the bow or your fingers on the drawstring and you're looking at everybody really aggressively, they're going to pay attention to you.
Arrow up!
Right. They're not going to... I mean, it's like when a predator comes near a bunch of deer, they put up the white tail and they say, you're not going to do that. But as an archer, if you can be neutral, if you can keep the bow down, not necessarily look at anybody specifically, but look out of the corners of your eyes, maybe look like you're lazy, like you're not paying attention, people will stop paying attention to you. There's other things, better things to pay attention to than a lazy archer, after all.
Oh, definitely, especially when you don't think it's going to be able to hit you.
And then they drop their shield a little bit, and that's when you're able to get your shot in. So archery is one of those, people make fun of archery a lot. I hear people make fun of it, the whole style, quite a bit, and I asked them to try it. I asked them to really examine the really good archers like Zuyon or Kirian. You know, the archers that can nail their target every single time. They are the epitome of this economy of force that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
But you're a red fighter.
Yes,
So you know all about archers.
I love them. Yeah, they're my favorite fight. They're the game changers. They are, in the sense, they're the divine force on the field. You always have to deal with them, and if you don't take proper precautions, they'll drop you in a second. Excuse my French. They're dangerous, and it's exactly what you said. It's all about cooldown. It's all about properly using your time. You know, are you gaining full advantage of having a bow in your hand by making people, when you want to, pay attention to you, and when you don't want them to, not pay attention, so you can capitalize those shots? Because as a killer, as an archer killer, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
How long does it take that archer to knock his arrow and fire a long range shot? Is it take 6-7 seconds? Because that's a big window, especially if he's out of arrows. Are you capitalizing on that? Because the longer you have, the more disruption you get, the longer your team has to do their job. Otherwise, if you're just blasting shots and not paying attention and everyone's fully aware of you and you're not able to do any damage and do your role, your energy is being wasted, it's much easier for someone else to capitalize on those mistakes.
Sure. And so you're not just leaving yourself open, you're leaving your team open at that point too.
Yeah, you're letting your team down by, feeding hard.
So how does a red user capitalize on economy of force? How does a red user who doesn't seem to in any way be neutral most of the times on the field, how do they kind of embody these lessons too?
Well, that's exactly as you're saying. So you have to capitalize on exactly that, on being a constant moving force. So when I take a side or take a point, it's all about immediate disruption.
Sure.
It's all about, there's a two-handed on this side. There is a wall breaker. This thing, that's its job. And personally, I like the flank, the counter flank style. I like picking at the end of walls. They're usually really strong. There's usually a lot of linchpin characters, linchpin fighters, very important key roles being held in these spots.
What are your primary targets? Like if you're a red fighter and you're trying to maximize your energy, what are your primary targets?
I'll tear down support. If I've got a strong shield with me, if I have a strong tank, a good counter fighter tank, or a strong DPS tank with me that's good at punching a hole when it opens up, I'll start shooting support. I'll start taking down spearmen. I rock a 8-foot glaive most of the time, and I love spear fighting. So I love to counterfight these DPS support, the spearmen that are just hunting for ankles and hunting for arms. I chop them down. I take the arm and I make the shieldmen push me, because that's what the shieldmen are going to do. They see me going out for a punish, and they're like, now's my chance to shut this support down, to stop this red fighter from being able to break reds. And that's when the good tank steps in, and that's why it's support. You're pushing for your teammates. I'm enabling my tanks. I'm enabling that aggressive tank to then punish. The other tanks are messing up. Now they're fishing me. Right. They're fishing, and that's where the style comes in. I maximize speed. I want speed. and I may not throw as many shots out as some red fighters, and I may not throw as many stabs out as spearmen, but I'm maximizing what I'm doing. Like, I'm maximizing the force of a red on the field.
And obviously with a red, as heavy as it is and as hard as it is to correct, you're not throwing shots that you don't think are going to connect.
Never.
Yeah.
Never. I never throw a feint that doesn't lead into a stab. I don't throw, any kind of... Even if I'm throwing a sweep, I better have at least multiple targets in range. That way, if one thinks it's directed at someone else, they don't see it coming at them. I am all about maximum use of energy, maximum parry, like counter fight. You have to
maximum effort.
You have to. It's just as we're talking about with those elite shieldmen. You got to be able to make as many correct, speedy, quick, clean decisions as possible in a consecutive manner. There's no way to beat archers that have range on you, shieldmen that have pushing aggression, or DPS that can tear down forts, tear down your limbs, make you unable to do your job. So you have to capitalize on every action, every footstep, every shot. And that's just how it works for Reds as far as I'm concerned. And that's, whatever, if that as a blanket statement as that is, it's there are many styles that have a similar situation where there's just a way to run them optimally, and you can run them in a different path, but you still have to capitalize on the energy use. And Florentine is, personally, I think, is definitely one of those styles, and definitely one that I know you are more than proficient at.
I do love Florentine. Being a lefty gives you a small advantage at Florentine because nobody expects you to come from that angle. Weirdly, because you have a sword there.
But you have two swords.
You do. But that's also a weakness because as a Florentiner, your economy of force begins far before you ever actually get into combat.
Yeah.
Because as a Florentiner, if you get shot on your way to your fight, or if you are stabbed by a long-distance spear shot or nabbed by a javelin or any of the other things that a shield would normally guard against, you are no longer useful as a Florentiner. So a Florentiner must rely on one of two things to succeed, to maximize their energy and be where they're supposed to be. And these are either the hard flanker Florentiner, who relies on mobility, or the counter Florentiner, who relies on surprise. They're more of a stealth thing. And you can tell them apart by where they appear when the line starts to break as people get close. Because the flanker has already gone wide. The idea
Every time.
Because the mobility Florentiner needs to outrun arrows, and needs to outrun reds, and needs to outrun anything that's going to outpace them. So if you're not a sprinter by nature, the flanker Florentine style is not necessarily good for you. But if those short bursts of cardio are for you, it makes for an excellent style. But again, they're relying on mobility. That's their entire purpose. And so if they get shot in the leg,
it's game over.
That's game over, basically. Where on the counter side, you've got your Florentiners that will hang back inside the line. And they're usually toward the edge of the line, but they're using a shieldman to basically block for them. Disruption. And then they're waiting for a break in the line, a hole to occur where they can get in, and the Florentine is generally far better in close quarters than most other styles because you can get really good wraps on both sides. I like to call it the atomic scissors. It's one of my favorite.
Very real.
I like to usually start it with atomic and then hit them before I say scissors because I think it's funny.
In true anime form.
You gotta call out your shots, man. So the Florentine, it absolutely, and it's another one of those ones like Archer. You cannot have wasted effort. You cannot be out there and doing anything that contributes to your death because it's high stakes. As a Florentiner, you have the least protection with the most damage output, and there are Florentiners that are amazing at blocking and amazing at controlling the battle. But a sword just cannot be as many places as a tower shield.
No.
It just can't.
No.
And we kind of touched on sword and borders a lot before, I think.
Yeah.
Kind of transitioning there. And they also have the same kind of lack of flexibility in shots, whereas the Florentiner has an entire realm of possibilities, but they're in high danger all the time.
High risk, high reward.
The sword and board user doesn't have as many options, but they're in a general state of static protection. As long as they're angled correctly, they can block most arrows and most spear shots or green shots without really a whole lot of effort.
Yeah.
So for the economy of force, there is just endurance, is patience, is waiting your time for the right time to strike. Because if you throw a shot too early, like we said earlier, you lose an arm as a shieldman.
Yep.
You're just a walking shield at that point. And while you still have your use, you don't have that lethal bite.
Can't do damage.
So it is far better as a shieldman to sit there and suffer the blows of the enemy and wait for them to make a mistake and overextend, I think.
That's where you need that support. That's where your support comes in. That's why squatting is like such an important thing. Even if you are a lone type fighter, being able to fight with an anchor point off of it, working with someone, even just knowing what they're doing, even if it has nothing to do with what you're doing technically, the fact that you know that they're tanking and they're pushing this, it's all about teamwork and working together in that regard. So the last big one that I can think of that I know you are definitely take as a personal style, most people have a hard time with it, even though it's the basis for the sport, single blue.
It is. I preach that all the time. Any of my students know that I say that entirely too much. But it's true. And you'd think on a field as diverse as having a bunch of reds, which is to say pikes and spears and archery and Florentiners, which are people using swords in both hands. And with all that diversity, a single sword wouldn't seem a wise decision for armament. But it can in fact be one of the most useful styles on the field in that it has the truest form of flexibility. A single blue user has the best speed. I mean, even a min red user is encumbered by their weapon naturally. Single blue isn't. They can go just about wherever they please. And so the skill ceiling is extremely high.
Yeah.
If you're out, I mean, I recommend to anybody to go out there with just a single blue and do it for a year because your skill level will go through the roof.
Oh, galaxies.
But, and so when you see a single blue user on the field, they're either very new and can't afford a shield, or they're somebody who's very dangerous and should be avoided because they know what they're doing. The reason they take to the field with just a single blue is they have mastered these points we're talking about.
100%.
Economy, you can't, because again, no wasted effort with the single blue. You're dead. I mean, you mess up at all and you're dead.
Yeah.
So they have to capitalize on every situation. They have to use their teammates even more so than any of their other companions.
It's the apex of what we've been talking about.
And companions, the other huge part of this is how people fight together. And so I want to talk about Oni for a second, because he is one of my absolute favorite people to fight with. And the reason for that is I feel like he complements me in his style because he's a very aggressive fighter.
Thank you.
You're welcome. but he's not aggressive in like the berserker way that we're talking. He doesn't just run in and get himself killed. He's a guy who enjoys opening shots. He baits the enemy. He gets in there and makes moves and makes the enemy rethink about where they're going to go. And when they're considering him, their opponents or his teammates can make their move. And that's not to say that Oni can't do it himself. I mean, he's very good at landing red shots. He's very good at taking legs. But I've often seen him leg and leave, something we like to say a lot, because that's the economy of force. Once he has neutralized his threat, he moves on to something else. So it may seem like a berserker type thing when somebody's being very aggressive, but in fact it can be a very calculating strike. It can be an aggression that is specifically calculated for the situation. Would you disagree?
Oh no, absolutely not. Yeah, it definitely. And that's what he says why I'm not berserker style very honestly, because he knows I use the rage at the sound. You know, A lot of people that fight with me know I am loud. I am so loud, and I use it as a form of disruption, and it places my neutral stance immediately in an aggressive slot. You don't need to know me to know what I'm doing right there, and that's what I want to do. I want to make them focus on me, let the other support, the other DPS tanks do their job unhindered,
Sure.
Make sure that archers are trying to shoot me, and I use it deceptively. I pull that, I build upon that, and then I immediately break it. I move rank. I drop my line. They'll know, I'll tell them ahead of time. I'll be like, hey, I'm going to pull a ton of aggro over here, and then I'm going to bail. I'm going to leave you guys to deal with this. Are you good? And like, yeah, we're ready. and I change the field with that. I know, a good tank on the other end of the field. I got a Kaji. I got a Malark over. I got a Turkey over on the other side of the line, and they know I'm coming. And you stack that line on one side, and all of a sudden, boom, you sprint. I get quiet. I drop the aggression because I don't let it control me. I control it, sure. And I use it to control. And so then you're changing it. They think you're over there. They think you're working. You got people running to support that line, and you're on the other end with a shredder tank tearing down the wall that they don't care about, that they're not even worried about at all.
Hardcore deception right there.
Exactly.
Which is not something you expect of a red, which is why it's so devious.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Just like your style. I mean, and I think that's why we mesh so well. You're a non-traditional tank. You take the static tank to the next plane. I absolutely love counter fighters. I can't say it enough. Because they can do it all. If you can't counter fight, you're not gonna make it through high tier. It's just not gonna happen. You're gonna get beat down by A and S tier fighters that know how to mess with people, that know how to get into people's heads, that can manipulate you through whatever means. And your style is, and that the best part about all counter fighters is that it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. You're already in their head, even though they might be messing with you, trying to throw feints, whatever. You counter shieldmen have not only the wall, but they have aggression, and it's all comes out whenever they decide to throw the counter. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've watched you in a fight just not throw a shot against a really skilled opponent and just lock them down for a couple hits. Bang, 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 bam, and then just throw. After you know where their combo's going, you're like, they peter off after 2 solid shots, 3 solid shots. So I'm going to wait for the no-risk opportunity to shut them down. And you'll pick all that information up being exactly what you are, a static tank. It's not about just standing there and looking scary or holding a wall. You're taking in information. You're watching other tanks fight. You're picking your holes. You're like, when this line rolls up, I know exactly where I'm gonna make a snipe and step back and step out and maintain distance, maintain control. And I love that because that capitalizes with a good support. I know when someone tries to peel out after me, when I get someone mad and they're like, I'm getting that guy, before he finishes that sentence, he's getting punished by that counter tank. It's
well, and that's our point on the field as a counter tank. I mean, I it's nice that somebody appreciates it because a lot of people yell at me for being too static.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, what's that energy? What's the choice that you make when you're applying your energy, when you're applying the neutral force, like when to move forward, when to make the counter?
Well, again, I often think to myself that I am not useful to my team dead. Unless my death specifically leads to my team winning, me dying in a careless manner does not serve my team in any way. So it behooves me to then be patient. And I suppose I've been doing shield work long enough that I'm confident in my blocking when my arm's doing okay, that I can sit there and be patient. I can sit there and wait for my opponent to make a mistake, because a lot of times people will. If you're not responding, if you're not sitting there doing the trade back and forth, people get frustrated.
Oh, yeah.
They almost feel like you're toying with them, and they'll start throwing harder, wilder shots trying to land something, and at this point, they usually open themselves up. And so at that point, you just kill them where they're open and move on to the next person. And so I suppose that it just takes patience. It's the whole point of it. It's nice to be able to have somebody who's able to force my opponent to do something else, because again, if it's just me there being patient, I'm not sure if I could accomplish much. But when I've got somebody like you rushing up on my side and forcing my opponent into positions where they are weak against me, well, that's where I shine.
And that, absolutely, and that kind of leads into like our last point on this, which is fighting cooperatively and the types of fighters that work well together. So we are both we can be highly aggressive, but we're counter fighters at heart. We want to affect our opponents in one way or another, and we both open holes in that way. So we're both essentially in different manners aiming our use of energy at the same types of goals. So in the end, we work well together. Whether I open a pocket or you open a similar pocket for me, we can advantageously simultaneously take advantage of these things. So it's just good to have a conducive style when working with people in this. It's like you need to be able to work with tanks. If you're a red, it's so important to learn to move and make shots around and be helpful to your tank. Help them be a tank. Draw aggro. Do these things. And it's important for tanks to be able to work with support weapons, to support a spear, to cover an archer, to pull aggro. That's your job. And your job is to help. Your job is to carry your fellow men around you. And you can't do that if you can't work together.
Absolutely. And being able to work together comes back to this idea of learning from your enemy. And so when we first started fighting, we were fighting against each other for the most part. And I learned that you were a dangerous fighter. And you learned that I was somebody to pay attention to.
Thank you. Yes, I would say greatly. More than that.
And that kind of forced us to study one another. And then when we both started working together at the Gladiators program, oftentimes we put ourselves on opposite teams because there's only the two of us
naturally
as the instructors. And if we were both on the same team, that would lend an unnatural advantage to whatever.
Yeah, you've got a stepbrothers situation going on there.
Exactly. So we often put ourselves on separate teams so that we can counterbalance one another, and that's often exactly what we do, fight opposite from one another. And so this has actually made us very good at predicting what the other person is going to do, which in turn makes it very easy to work together.
It's been crazy. I've never seen such a light switch of a partner, of someone to work with. I mean, when we fought years and years and years ago in Stygia, when we would be on the same team, I would basically just, I'll take the blame. I can be a wild hare of a support fighter. I'm sprinting around all the time. I'm running around, and it's similar to your style. It's on or off. Right. But my native position is on switch. and I use the off as the deceptive, where you are the opposite. And the off is the native, and the switch on is the deception, which is really what's made us such a good team. Is it's so easy to quickly apply the other side of the switch. I don't need to turn on if or vice versa if you're already ready for that.
Right.
Click, and when we've been fighting like that for it excuse the ramble of the brain, but that's how I felt when it first happened. And we teach together so much. I'm used to just fighting against you, and the kids learn from that, as you were saying. Like they pick up how to assess proper targets and not just fold to a pressure, to figure out that there are different ways to beat those situations. And when we started fighting together recently on the same team, it was effortless because I knew what you were going to do.
Right. And like I said, I can feel what you're going to do, which makes it really nice if I'm doing the shield thing, because otherwise you're just out there, a leaf in the wind. So to know that there's somebody who's got your back is a good thing. Well, I think we've covered a lot of this topic of economy of force. How about you?
Deeply, thoroughly.
Well, if you guys have made it this far, thank you so much for listening. We're always looking for feedback, so if you know either of us, please get in touch with us. We're going to have an email set up fairly soon, so we'll be having those in the links. And thank you again to Nightmare Box Productions for letting us have a space here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is Yaga Malark signing off.
Onishiro.
We'll see you guys next time for Strategic Offensive.
Keep on slaying it. We can cut that.